Hello everyone, welcome to an reading channel. Today we are going to read a book called Counterclockwise. This is a book about health, illness, and aging, which are closely related to our lives. We all want to stay healthy, stay away from illnesses, and not age so quickly, but undeniably, everyone is on the path to aging. In many people's minds, aging is a frightening thing because it somehow implies decline. For example, physiologically, vision may decline, and mobility may become less flexible. Cognitively, intelligence, memory, and reactivity may become much less than before, which is commonly referred to as senile dementia. But is this really the case? Evidence from neuroscience shows that there is no essential difference in brain activity between more than 90% of 60-year-olds and 20-year-olds. This means that older people are not inferior to young people in cognitive abilities such as memory, reasoning ability, and information processing speed. So why do we always associate old age with frailty, helplessness, and illness? This may be because we tend to have a rigid mindset about aging, believing that as we age, we will inevitably decline and become frail. Indeed, many problems are caused by aging, but we cannot ignore other possibilities. For example, when people find that they cannot remember things as well as they used to, many people's first reaction is, "I'm getting old," but in fact, it may just be that we are not spending as much time and effort on remembering as we used to. As the author of this book says, aging is a concept that is instilled in us, and we need to see more possibilities. The author, Ellen Langer, is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Harvard University and one of the founders of positive psychology. Professor Langer has conducted more than 50 years of research in the field of positive psychology, hosted numerous groundbreaking and paradigm-shifting experiments on the relationship between mind and body, and received numerous awards for her work. This book contains many experiments conducted by Professor Langer, and the following interpretation will revolve around these experiments. Professor Langer's psychological perspective differs somewhat from most psychological research. Generally speaking, psychology tends to describe general facts, such as the decline in vision and memory over time. If someone reaches old age with particularly good vision and memory, psychologists often classify this as an exception. However, Professor Langer's interest lies precisely in these exceptions because they add a layer of possibility to how we view ourselves and the world. This book aims to explore another possibility for health, illness, and aging, as well as the methods to achieve this possibility. Next, I will divide the interpretation of this book into two parts. In the first part, we will examine what seemingly impossible things are actually possible regarding health and aging. For example, is it possible to achieve counterclockwise growth? To what extent can our mental state affect our physical state? In the second part, we will focus on the uncertainty surrounding health on the path to counterclockwise growth. For example, do seemingly definitive diagnostic labels really make us healthier? First, let's explore whether it is possible to turn back the clock and achieve counterclockwise growth. In 1979, the author, Ellen Langer, conducted an experiment called the counterclockwise study to investigate whether participants' bodies could become younger if their minds were made to feel 20 years younger. To turn back the clock, the author made many preparations. She found a secluded monastery and restored it to its appearance in 1959. She then recruited 16 elderly people around the age of 80 and divided them into two groups, an experimental group and a control group. They were asked to stay at the monastery for a week. The elderly participants felt excited and curious about this experiment and arrived at the monastery by bus. However, when they got off the bus, they were surprised rather than just curious. The author told them that they would be responsible for their own luggage, and no staff would help them carry it. She also said that if they couldn't carry all of it at once, they could take less each time and make multiple trips. Initially, they all thought they couldn't do it because many of them hadn't carried so much by themselves in over a decade. But in the end, although they had to rest frequently, they successfully carried their luggage into their rooms. The experiment officially began. During this week, the elderly participants discussed political and social topics from 20 years ago, listened to radio programs and watched TV shows from that time, played music from that era, and read newspapers and magazines from 1959. The only difference between the two groups was that the experimental group was required to communicate in the present tense, reflecting that it is 1959 now, in all their conversations. This task was not easy because it wasn't just about pretending to live in 1959, but about trying to make their minds completely return to the past and believe that they were actually living in 1959. On the other hand, the control group was asked to communicate in the past tense, reminding them that they were not actually in 1959 but were just reminiscing about the past. The effects were evident from the second day of the experiment. The elderly participants, who had previously been very dependent on their families, became actively engaged in various activities at the monastery, such as setting tables, cleaning, and taking care of their daily needs. After a week, the author conducted physical examinations on them and found significant improvements in various aspects such as hearing, vision, physical strength, gait, posture, memory, cognition, taste sensitivity, and hand dexterity. Remarkably, several of the elderly participants even played rugby. More interestingly, the changes in the experimental group were more pronounced compared to the control group, and by comparing photos taken before and after the week, the experimental group appeared at least 2 years younger. The experiment concluded that within just 1 week, these 16 elderly individuals, simply by believing they were 20 years younger and adopting a younger mindset, experienced corresponding physical changes. While this may seem unbelievable, it did indeed occur. However, there are a few noteworthy aspects worth revisiting. Firstly, when the participants first disembarked from the bus, the author insisted that they carry their own luggage. This may seem unreasonable, considering they were around 80 years old and could have easily asked for assistance, which would have been offered in most real-life situations. But the author's intention was to make them aware that many of them might have been overprotected. Helping others may make the helper feel good, but over time, it can rob the recipient of their sense of control. When this sense of agency is completely lost, a person may truly enter into old age. This sense of control is particularly crucial for individuals in their old age, as it not only impacts their happiness but also their physical and mental well-being. In another experiment conducted in a nursing home in the 1970s, the author and colleagues demonstrated the importance of control for the elderly. They divided the residents into 2 groups. The experimental group could make their own decisions, such as choosing a preferred potted plant, deciding where to place it, when and how much to water it. They could also choose where to receive visitors and when to watch movies. The control group, on the other hand, had to follow the staff's arrangements. A year and a half later, when the author returned to the nursing home, she found that the residents who had more control over their lives were not only happier, more active, and more alert but also had a lower mortality rate, which was half that of the control group. The purpose of these experiments was not to suggest that we stop helping the elderly but to encourage more consideration before offering assistance. This means giving them more time and choices to see if they can overcome difficulties on their own. While it is important to take care of the elderly with filial piety and dedication, sometimes this well-intentioned protection can deprive them of their autonomy and sense of control over their lives. Therefore, whether it's family members or caregivers, they should encourage and respect the personal ideas and choices of the elderly, allowing them to maintain autonomy in their lives, which is more beneficial to their physical and mental health. Secondly, it's worth noting that in the counterclockwise study, the control group, who nostalgically remembered the past using the past tense, also showed physical improvements, although not as significant as the experimental group. This may seem counterintuitive because reminiscing about the past often evokes a sense of sadness and a feeling of getting older. However, researchers have found that while people of different ages, including youth, middle age, and old age, may all nostalgize, their purposes for doing so differ. Young people tend to nostalgia to explore their identity or solve problems, whereas older adults do so more to pass on experience and maintain close relationships with others. Therefore, when the elderly recall the past, they focus on the positive aspects of their memories and experience more positive emotions rather than sadness and loss. Furthermore, according to psychologist Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, individuals enter a stage of ego integrity in old age. How do they achieve this? Nostalgia provides an opportunity for them to review and re-examine their life history, ultimately accepting themselves and gaining a sense of completeness and wisdom. This is the role that nostalgia plays. In the book, Hello, My White-Haired Life, there is a passage that explains this beautifully. For the elderly, nostalgia is not just about reminiscing about the past but also about finding motivation to move forward in the beauty or regrets of the past, inspiring them to better ground themselves in the present and confidently move towards a brighter future. As family members, when our parents continually share stories from the past, we can perhaps listen and understand more, showing less impatience, and accompanying them as they revisit the beauty of past times and witness the miracle of reverse aging. Finally, in the counterclockwise study, it becomes evident that what contributed to the reverse aging of these elderly individuals was not only their sense of control and the positive effects of nostalgia but also the subtle influence of social and environmental cues. Things like communicating in the present tense and avoiding anything specifically designed as suitable for the elderly all provide subtle psychological hints of youthfulness. In our daily lives, without realizing it, our physical and mental health is constantly influenced by these cues, which can be either positive or negative. They are like switches that control our behavior. The author and her students once conducted a priming experiment in which they randomly selected 100 photos of people and asked participants to categorize them. The experimental group was instructed to categorize the photos based on their own criteria, such as gender, skin color, or hairstyle, as long as it was unrelated to age. This was done to prime them to ignore old age cues. In contrast, the control group was specifically asked to categorize the photos by age, thus priming them with old age cues. After the task was completed, the real experiment began as the researchers recorded how long it took for the participants to walk from the laboratory door to the elevator. The results showed that participants primed with old age cues took longer and walked with a heavier gait, resembling that of actual elderly individuals, compared to the experimental group. On the other hand, if we prime individuals with positive cues, the outcomes can be vastly different. In another experiment, the author recruited hotel room attendants and divided them into two groups. One group was told that their regular work was equivalent to getting enough exercise and meeting the health standards set by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. The other group was not given this information. After 4 weeks, a remarkable change occurred. The group that was told their work was already sufficient exercise experienced improvements in their weight, body fat, and blood pressure, becoming healthier overall. Importantly, these healthier attendants did not engage in any additional exercise outside of work. Of course, dedicating time and effort to exercise, such as running or doing calisthenics, is a better way to maintain health. However, for those who lack the extra time and energy to exercise, like office workers who sit for long hours or elderly people with mobility issues, we can shift our perspective. We can view every physical activity as a form of exercise because exercise is not limited to activities outside of work and daily routines. It can happen at any time, such as when getting up to fetch water or going out to buy groceries. If we provide ourselves and the elderly at home with more of these positive cues, it may improve our health to some extent. Now that we have covered the details of the counterclockwise study, let's summarize briefly. Through the results of the counterclockwise experiment, the author demonstrates that it is possible to turn back the clock and achieve ageless growth. However, it's important to note that this does not mean everyone will achieve the same results by living as they did in the past. Instead, it suggests that if we make some changes, there is a possibility for improvement. If we stubbornly and recklessly believe that aging and decline are inevitably linked, we may fall into rigid and inflexible thinking, assuming that aging necessarily means decline and thus overlooking the possibility for change. In reality, aging does not necessarily equate to decline, nor does it imply a lack of control or improvement potential. Often, what limits us may not be our bodies themselves but our perceptions of them. People can break free from stereotypes about age and aging limits by making psychological adjustments, maintaining a healthy mental state, giving more positive psychological cues, and gaining a greater sense of control. As a result, their bodies may also improve accordingly, undergoing counterclockwise changes. Now that we have discussed the possibility of turning back the clock and achieving ageless growth, let's talk about the uncertainties surrounding health on this journey. We often prefer certainty because it gives us a sense of security. However, the author has realized through years of research that pursuing certainty can be a dangerous mindset. When everything is certain, we lose sight of the world's possibilities. Therefore, the author advises us not to fear uncertainty, especially regarding our health. Uncertainty has many benefits, as it creates more opportunities for choice and helps us better control our lives. This may sound strange because we have long pursued certain answers regarding health. For example, when we are sick, we are often anxious to know what is wrong. Whether we search online or consult an expert, we seek authoritative information about our symptoms and hope that the doctor's diagnosis will provide a prescription for our health. At first glance, this seems like a reasonable approach that most people take. However, the crux of the issue lies here. In the process of seeking medical advice for our health concerns, we tend to focus more on the format rather than the content. What does this mean? Let me tell you a small story. Once, the author and her students approached a line waiting to use a copy machine and asked to cut in. They used 3 different ways to make their request. Can I use the copy machine first? Can I use the copy machine first because I need to make a copy? Can I use the copy machine first because I'm in a hurry? As expected, people were more likely to let them cut in when they used the second and third requests. However, interestingly, the second request, can I use the copy machine first because I need to make a copy, was not a valid reason because everyone in line needed to make a copy. So why did almost no one question it? The author believes it's due to the key word, because, in the sentence structure. In other words, as long as a reason is given, regardless of how absurd it may be, people tend to agree without much thought. The same applies to medical visits. When a doctor makes a diagnosis, it often leads patients to comply and follow the prescribed treatment without much question. We don't pay much attention to the basis for the diagnosis or whether it aligns with our actual situation. In other words, we don't consciously participate in the decision-making process of the diagnosis, as if it has nothing to do with us. However, the author reminds us that diagnostic tools are imperfect and not 100% accurate. While these tools may successfully predict outcomes for most people, there will always be individual differences in real-world situations. Therefore, it is highly misleading to summarize a person's identity, condition, experience, or potential with a single diagnostic label. This not only misleads ourselves but also professional doctors. Diagnostic labels can easily lead people on a path of hypothesis confirmation, information gathering, driving them to seek evidence that supports the diagnostic label. For example, after being diagnosed with depression, many people may attribute common phenomena in their lives to their depression, such as poor appetite, insomnia, and mood swings. In reality, the accuracy rate of depression diagnosis is only about 50%, so you may not have depression but just a simple mood issue. This applies not only to ordinary people but also to doctors who can be misled by diagnostic labels. When the author worked at Yale University, she conducted a study with another psychologist. They created a video of a person undergoing a job interview and showed it to clinical psychologists. Half of the clinical psychologists were told that the person in the video was a patient, while the other half were told that the person was a job seeker. The results showed that when the person in the video was labeled as a job seeker, all the clinical psychologists believed he performed well and had no issues. However, when he was labeled as a patient, there was A among the clinical psychologists. Some believed he exhibited poor performance and needed treatment, while others thought he performed well and did not require treatment. This leads us to consider a question. Diagnosis is supposed to provide help for our health, to give us a better understanding and a sense of control over our own health status. But in reality, does it really help us become healthier? Perhaps we should re-examine the power of diagnostic labels and medical terminology. For example, many people who want children but cannot have them are labeled as infertile. While some may indeed be infertile, others may not. Once labeled as infertile, people often treat it as an unchanging fact, which can lead to extreme disappointment and stress. Stress itself is a factor in infertility, and over time, it can also lead to a deterioration in the relationship between partners. If the relationship between partners deteriorates, the possibility of conception further decreases. As a result, the diagnosis of infertility becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Take cancer as another example. If someone has cancer and then it disappears without recurrence, is it in remission or cured? Although both terms indicate that the person's condition is stable, subtle differences in terminology can have a significant impact on a person's health. The author recruited 64 participants from New England who had all been diagnosed with breast cancer and were now in a stable condition, but they had different views on their condition. Some believed they were in remission, while others believed they were cured. Therefore, the author divided them into two groups, the remission group and the cured group. They completed several health questionnaires, and the results showed that compared to the remission group, the cured group had significantly higher overall health levels, better physical function, more energy, less fatigue, less pain, and stronger psychological well-being. Yes, the author wants us to re-examine the power of diagnostic labels and medical terminology to make us aware that although labels can help us organize our thoughts, problems arise when labels determine our thoughts. Whether it's a doctor's diagnosis or a label we give ourselves, accepting it uncritically and believing it to be fixed and unchanging is, to some extent, not helpful for our health. So, what should we do about illness? The author believes that the most important thing is to maintain awareness. Simply put, we need to consciously and moderately pay attention to changes in our bodies, which means, as we mentioned earlier, focusing on the uncertainty of health, not treating diagnosis as an answer or explanation, but as a starting point for further questioning. By maintaining awareness and focusing on changes, we can avoid becoming prisoners of our symptoms. For example, we can keep a diary to maintain awareness of our physical condition, noting down changes in our body and the surrounding environment every few hours. Studies have found that maintaining aware writing can relieve stress, enhance the immune system, lower blood pressure, enhance psychological well-being, and improve health in many other ways. For instance, if someone has chronic pain, they can try to maintain awareness and observe changes in their symptoms. How often does the pain occur in a certain area? Is it every other day? Or multiple times a day? How long does each pain last? How severe is the pain? Are there any periods when there is no pain at all? What are you doing during those times? By recording these situations and being aware of changes in your body, you can gain a more comprehensive understanding of your symptoms. At this point, you may discover that the pain is not constant and that there are certain environments or time periods when there are no symptoms, and there seem to be some patterns. This provides people with a direction for controlling and improving their bodies. Following this approach, we can ask more questions, and with different questions, different answers will follow. In addition to maintaining our own awareness, we can also assist our family and friends in maintaining theirs by observing subtle changes in their bodies. This can provide them with positive experiences and make them feel valued and important, which can contribute to their physical and mental health. Once a doctor said, "We doctors need you to help us think better. We need you to question us, to point out when we are doing well and when we are going astray." It's not easy being a doctor, but it's even harder being a patient. Indeed, medicine itself is a scientific exploration with its own uncertainties and is not an absolute truth. When it comes to general information about a certain illness, it is necessary to consult a doctor's advice because doctors know more than we do. However, when it comes to the unique aspects of each person's condition, only the patient themselves knows best about their own feelings and thoughts. Therefore, what we need to do is combine the doctor's perspective with our own understanding of ourselves. When the doctor is diagnosing us, we shouldn't passively wait for the doctor to ask the questions they think are important for diagnosis. Instead, we should actively provide important information related to our own feelings and actively participate in decision-making about our own health. Well, that's all for the introduction to this book, Younger Next Year. In the first part, we saw the possibility of growing younger through the counterclockwise study conducted by the author. It tells us that aging does not necessarily mean decline. Many times, what limits us may not be our bodies themselves, but our perceptions of them. Although we cannot truly turn back the clock and stop the aging process, we can still consciously choose to age in a youthful way. For example, by adjusting our views on our physical limitations, changing impressions of aging, and giving ourselves some positive psychological hints, we can control decline and improve our health. In the second part, we discussed that pursuing certainty is actually a frightening mindset because when everything is certain, we cannot see the possibilities in the world. Therefore, the author suggests that we should not fear uncertainty, especially regarding our health. By treating medical diagnostic information as a guide rather than an absolute truth and acknowledging that things change, we can see the possibility of improving our health and overcoming illness. As psychologist Lee Songwei once commented on the book, Younger Next Year, this book discusses how psychological states can promote physical health, but its greater value lies in disrupting our understanding of health. It reveals the fact that overly medicalized diagnostic language constructs health as a rigid, linear, and unquestionable system of knowledge, which ironically hinders health rather than promoting it. Breaking this perception and returning to a world full of uncertainties and possibilities can bring different hopes for health. Well, that's all for today's introduction. You can click the share button below the video to share this book with your friends for free. See you next time.